Good evening, friends. I've just had a wonderful Zoom call with some lovely members from the Synthesize Tarot course that we're doing together, and I thought I'd strike while the iron's hot and do another reading on the back of that because it's been quite a long time. So in the course, which we've been doing for a few months now, we're up to session 4, where using the Decad system, we're studying one card from the first arcana, the first decad of the arcana, and its analogue in the second decad. So in the 4th session, that means we're up to the 4th arcanum, the Emperor, and the 14th arcanum, which is Temperance. The first cards of the first arcana are static and sephirothic. So in this case, the Sephira associated with the 4th arcanum, the letter Dalet, is Da'ath. So with the Emperor and its analogue, the Guardian Angel, we are in the Sephira of Da'ath. In the Quaternary, we're at the 4th part of the Quaternary. So by this we mean we're following a tetragrammatic structure as we go through the arcana, the tetragrammaton being the fourfold name of God, which is in itself, of course, a cross, a quaternary. In this system, the first arcanum, the Magician, is associated with the Yod, the first letter of the tetragrammaton, the positive letter, Yod. Then it's followed by He, with the High Priestess, the second arcanum, which is passive in relation to the Magician, just as He, the feminine, is passive in relation to the fecundating Yod of the tetragrammaton, masculine and feminine. When we get to the Empress, we're with the neutral, it's positive and negative, the vow. So that can be understood as a father, a mother, and a child, the product of them both, with the Empress, the vow of the tetragrammaton. And now with session 4, this brings us up to the end of the first cycle, which is signified by the second He of the tetragrammaton. We have the 4th arcanum, Dalet, Da'ath, the Emperor. Now the tarot is dynamic, as is life, as is the tetragrammaton, the word. So they're positioned, if we can imagine this on a wheel, Yod, He, vow, second He. The end of the first cycle, the Emperor, marks the start of the next. So the movement brings the Emperor, the 4th clause of the tetragrammaton, the closing quarter of the quaternary, activates the shift to the next cycle, and the Emperor henceforth becomes the Yod as the wheel turns. So, and of course we've completed the Godhead section of the Tree of Life, Keter, Hokmah and Binah, which are associated with the Magician, the High Priestess and Empress respectively. And then so that's like this, the top triangle on the Tree of Life. And then when we get to the 4th part in my system, where Da'ath is an integrated Sephira, this is where the Emperor is. This is the portal, the gateway to the abyss, and the place where the covenant between God and humanity is made in Da'ath. It's at the top of the middle pillar before Keter. And I can't recite the Gates of Light, Sha'ar, Aura by heart, but I do remember there's some wonderful passages about Da'ath and the importance of being connected, the Shekinah, or Israel, as it would be put in the Tree of Life, to maintain that connection with Da'ath, which is the middle pillar. That's where that connection is forged between the lower Sephira of Malkuth, Yesod, the holy palace of Tifereth, fire, water, air, and the covenant of Da'ath. So yes, so and as the full moon is also coming up in a couple of days, but I thought it better to meet on the weekend. That was also auspicious because we're following a cycle of 1.5 full moons. So we either start on the new moon or the full moon, depending where it comes. And we have sort of 2 weekly switches in meditations from Olive Pixley. So in a couple of days we'll get a new one of those. But also, it's not just our course that's kind of in sync at the moment. We've also had the election of a new pope. As we get ready to, as I start thinking about preparing session 5, which will be the Pope with the Devil. Those 2 cards are twinned together as binaries in this decad system. So we've had this new Pope, and this also coincides with Vesak. Well, it's on the full moon, but it's a couple of days away. So the inauguration of the Pope and Vesak are converging this year, just as the 2 Easters, Orthodox and the rest of the Christian world, Easters, Latin calendar, they converged also this year. And one of the themes we've been looking at, I've been particularly interested in, have been for a while as we build up to 2025, is a theosophical concept of the externalization of the hierarchy, which, according to theosophical teaching, occurs in the 25th year of a given century. So, of course, that will be this year, and in particular, it is amplified around this time of year because Vesak is highly significant in the theosophical canon. So we also have this externalization of the hierarchies, which is a concept I've been sort of mulling over without necessarily knowing what it is. I haven't read all the theosophical works, and I kind of put this to the group, which did and does contain some people who are knowledgeable about theosophy, and I said, this externalization of the hierarchy, particularly significant in this year, as it follows the precession of the equinoxes, which was completed in 2020 with the line of planets in Capricorn. It seems that we're not just at this century point with the externalization of the hierarchy, but at a precessional kind of macro level shift, not only through the precession, but what that means in terms of entry to the age of Aquarius. And as Mark, one of our members, pointed out, there's a collective difficulty in letting go of the past era. I can relate to that for sure. Difficulty letting go of the past era. Especially as it's such a long, like I say, it's not just a century, we're talking thousands of years, 25, 26,000 years. And what it means to let that go. All its karma, many, many lifetimes. That would mean that we also dovetail between theosophical and Buddhist and Christian Catholic teachings, where the latter would not, would say there is only one life. But in this case, the last life and the one life are the same thing at the same time, because there's nothing else after that. So it's the same outcome. So there's also this going on. A question whether the externalization of the hierarchy might actually involve real people either coming into office, as with the Pope, which is the obvious example at this time, but also other archetypal figures. You have the posts of Emperor, of Empress, of High Priestess, of Magician, and more lovers. How realistic is it to think that an externalization in the physical plane is possible, and is that going to be positive? That's the other thing. It's just because there could be an externalization in a literal sense, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all the figures who occupy the archetypes are necessarily good. We don't know yet. So we have that happening at this time. And also, as I think it was Mark again who brought up, a culminating of the Kali Yuga. Now there's dispute over whether we've been going through the Kali Yuga for the past however many years, or we're about to enter it sort of within the next couple of hundred. I've since the 1990s believed that we are in the Kali Yuga. I acknowledge that others would say it's still to come. But one thing I did mention when Mark brought this up was that I read once that the only benefit to being in the Kali Yuga, which is a terrible time, is that time doesn't have the same meaning. It doesn't behave in the same way. It can be massively accelerated in the Kali Yuga. So what this means from the point of view of spiritual praxis and training is that you may attain in a split second what would normally be the work of many lifetimes, or a full lifetime, or years, or longer. So the time is not so much of a trap in the Kali Yuga. Yes, you might be trapped in the sense of being in that epoch that is so much harder and darker than the others, but there's also the ability to compress time and remind oneself of Tomberg's conception of eternity, which is an intensity, not a duration. So a quality, not a quantity. So if you think in terms of intensity, I suppose it's akin to a nuclear reaction, the power of being in the atom. So if you can activate that atom of whatever it is you're trying to achieve, particularly spiritually, or only that's how it's applied, then there is this opportunity to overcome space, time. So, now I was going to read something from the Solar Way, from the Fourth Arcanum, when Nina Rudnikova writes, "The whole world is a manifestation of the Quaternary law. Each phenomenon in it and each form captures one of its cycles and is in connection with the previous and subsequent cycles. Thus the world of forms and phenomena is a continuous chain of the flow of life, conditioned by the quaternary law of space dynamics. This quaternary law, or rather one of these cycles, is contained in each thing and groups the forms we perceive separately into a synthesis of phenomena connected with each other by a previous cycle that conceals the reason for their existence." The hidden past. Lost continents. Thus the cause of phenomena is never on the same plane but always higher. The causes of the physical world must therefore be sought in the psychological and astral world, and the causes of the phenomena of the astral world in the ideological or mental plane. Ideological formations are rooted in the syntheses of the spiritual world, and this latter directly expresses the possibilities of the spiritual essence of everything that exists. Ultimately, the phenomena of the world are connected with each other precisely through their common spirit. This means that there is no direct connection between the parts of the periphery, that the connection between them always occurs through the centre with which they are connected by their radii, that is, with the threads of the mother of the world, or the continuous process of manifestation. Yes, so this was another thing we touched on in the group meeting. Billy brought up the topic of viewpoints and the importance of having other viewpoints as we attempt to know ourselves and complete our tikkun olam, our soul mission, the great work, the path, as we walk the path of return. And that reminded me that for quite a few months, weeks and months, at the beginning of this course, where we had over 40 participants in the beginning, which is a lot of people, I thought about the differences of opinion that might be inherent in any group of people who are together for any reason, you know, be it right or left wing politics, a particular allegiance to one side in a war, other ideological factors, Catholic and anthroposophist, as I've been in other groups where there have been terrible arguments between those two groups. So I was just sort of thinking, you know, what if conflict arises in our group setting, and how should that be circumvented? And I thought about the problem of division on a mundane level, which obviously the world is utterly rife with it at the moment. We don't even have to go into the ways that people can be annoyed with each other and disagree. But what I would meditate upon was the idea of us all being connected at the centre. We are unified by virtue of our connection with the centre, with the divine. So in this case, the centre is above. It's the upward part of the triangle. We're at the base. You know, you could, if it was flattened to 2 dimensions, it would be like a circle surrounded by the 12. The sun surrounded by the star signs, the constellations. And as a 3D model, it's the upward triangle. And I was talking about how on almost any ideological position in the mundane world, if not the spiritual one where we rise above these things, most people have a position on a scale, on a circle, right, left, up, down. Whether it's politics, you might incline more towards left or right. You might, whatever the issue is, you know, you might try to get as close to the central point as possible, but then situations change, and if your viewpoint doesn't quite catch up, you're tipped into one side or the other. So I was just thinking about diversities of viewpoints and how valuable it is as a spiritual exercise to remove ourselves from our comfortable or usual, it might not be comfortable, but it might be usual, we might be quite stuck in it, position on this circle between which all views are seen, but they don't always see eye to eye, because if you're facing outwards from your point, you won't see what the person with his back to you. You might be able to give side eye, you know, by a few degrees, but you'll never understand what the opposite point of view looks like. The only way to do that is to face the centre. So always being oriented towards the centre, and, you know, trying to sometimes, if we find we have a particularly strong view on something, to try to imagine what it's like at the opposite pole, because after all, as we've said all along, it's the neutralisation of binaries, the resolution of antinomies, the solving of these binary positions that constitutes the great emetic work, the gift of black perfection, where light is drawn from darkness, where we look beyond what is known and knowable to the regions beyond the veil, using the spiritual gifts such as we have them of intuition, discernment, and so on, obedience, poverty, chastity, hope, faith, love, all these things that are aspects of the divine which enable us to see further than what's plainly visible with the naked eye, and into these regions of the unknown, from which we draw the connecting factors that will take us to our point of unity with the divine at the top. So we had to mention, yes, the neutralisation of binaries, key to the work. Is there anything else from Nina Runakova? I'm not going to read the whole thing because, you know. says the material given by the earth is transformed according to the idea that forms it. On this basis, the stones that served as the material for the walls of the temple and the stones that served for the walls of the prison belong to two completely different ideas, charged with a completely different energetic charge, and only our rough vision relates them to the same category of facts. Yeah. The form depends on the creative idea and the material of the medium. The more perfect the design, the more stable the form. Knowledge of the elements of the dynamic law and the ability to combine them gives great power. This power is both the power of the ideological world over the subtle world and the power of the subtle world over the world of physical phenomena. The use of power is based on authority, and authority arises due to reliance on previous implementation cycles. The Emperor is the arcanum of authority. That's one of his names. His authority comes from the completion of that cycle, being the teacher and the school. Life flows continuously, but the break of cycles entails the capture of consciousness in the cell of a detached system of cycles. One cycle continuously and naturally follows from the other, linking all the planes of manifestation into continuous conscious creativity. On this continuity and naturalness of cycles, the ideometer process of thought creation is built, which is mentioned in the third principle. To implement an idea in an earthly form, it is necessary to have the fulcrum of an auto-V pivot. She gets quite technical here. After the thought image is created, there is further volitional intervention of the creator of the thought image. This is quite insightful. People's desires are usually fulfilled when the desire is extinguished. That is, when the thought image is released and non-interference gives it the opportunity to really come true. Once realized, the ideometer process will collapse, and the realized phenomenon which in turn begins to emit an energy charge, partly transmitting it further and partly striving back to its original source. So very complicated, but very simple in a way. The whole cosmos lives, develops and breathes quaternary law. I'm just saying it, but I don't want to just read a whole. She starts talking about the fall of humanity, the fall of consciousness. Okay, well, I think I'm going to sneeze in a minute, so I'm going to end this now before I sneeze. So thank you for thank you for listening. It's only half an hour, so that's enough from me for now. I'll try and check in a bit sooner again later. Thank you. Bye bye.